Thank you. It's great being here. David said I'll enlighten you. Maybe I'll frighten you a little bit too. I hope not to do that. I was going to use you people as guinea pigs today. Believe it or not. Usually when I'm old school, and when I give remarks or I'm asked to give a speech, I still like to have paper in front of me because if it messes up. And I thought today I'm going to try and do it off my iPad. So I downloaded the speech on the iPad and I have it here. But after listening to your first presenter this morning, it just scared the daylights out of me to use an iPad. So I'm going back to the old paper. I'm not going to use that iPad. He scared me now. It's really a pleasure being here and spending a few minutes with you today and talk about issues that are very important to you. I don't know I've got to ask Dave's children. Did Dave always get you up in the middle of the night on the weekends? Did he really? Was he one of these fathers that got you up and said, okay, everybody up, here's your list of chores, get it done? Does Dave not understand that Saturday morning is for sleeping in? Does he not get that, David? I mean, he reminds me of my father. I grew up in upstate New York with in a very Catholic family. Matter of fact, we used to refer to my mother as the Pope of the West. Pope Mary is what we called her. But for some reason, growing up, my father thought that if we get up early on Sunday morning and go to 6 o'clock Mass, that we'd be more in tune with God. We'd get it at early in the morning. We never understood that. And when you're a 16-year-old teenager and you've been out all night having fun, and there's a knock on your door at 5:15, Mass in 45 minutes, and you're just going, really, Dad? Do I have to do that? So, for Dave's children, sorry, they're weeping, right? They're over there weeping about it. So, but it is a pleasure being with you here today and having an opportunity to share some thoughts with you. I want to start off. I told Dave just a moment ago. I said, "Thanks, Dave. I get to speak after everybody have breakfast and they all want to take a nap now." I said, well, you'll wake them up. So I thought about that, and I brought a little prop with me today because I think it's very important that you all have one of these now. Apparently having a whistle and being a whistleblower in this country today is pretty important. So, if anybody wants to come up and use the whistle to blow the whistle on somebody today, you can, because it looks like there's a whistleblower out there who thinks he or she, and most likely it's a he, can bring down the President of the United States by blowing the whistle. So if you need the whistle today, it's up here for you to. My son, who is a football coach up at Davis High School in Kaysville, go Darts. Can you believe our mascot is a dart? I've never figured that out. He said, Dad, don't lose this whistle. And I said, son, it's a whistle. He said, Dad, that whistle cost $12. A whistle for $12? Can't you go to the dollar store and get them for $1? So I can't lose this thing. If I do, he's going to come after me. I want to thank Dave for inviting me to share some thoughts with you today. Dave will give me a call occasionally about my radio show. He will always have a suggestion or two on things I should look at or say. Sometimes I actually do pay attention to him, but not very often. But he asked me today to talk a little bit about freedom and talk about globalism. And I know a lot of people here in the audience this morning are very aware of the challenges that we face and the attacks that are taking place on our families, our individual freedoms, our communities, and most importantly, the attacks on this great country in which we live in and the values that we hold so near and dear to our hearts. Before I begin, though, I want to share a story. Now, I know there are a lot of you fans of Ronald Reagan in the audience today. Ronald Reagan was a great, great communicator, maybe the best this country has ever had, in my opinion. And I'm going to steal a story from Ronald Reagan. Some of you may have heard this before, but it's really a fun story. And if you've heard it, I apologize. If you haven't, hopefully you'll enjoy it. But he shared this story, and if you go to the Ronald Reagan website, he has story after story after story on there. He was just simply a great storyteller and a great communicator. But he told the story once about a Republican who decided to take the chance on campaigning, and he decided to take his campaign to the farm in rural America. Now at that time, and I suggest this was probably during FDR's time, rural America was very much a Democratic stronghold at that time. And Republicans rarely won anything in the farming communities. But this Republican candidate said, you know what, I'm going to see what happens. So he stopped by a farm. He was out campaigning one day, decided to go into the farming community, and stopped by a farm one day to do some campaigning. Now, when he came up to the farm, the farmer heard that he was a Republican, and his jaw dropped. And he said to the candidate, wait right here. Please, wait right here for just a minute. I need to go get Ma, because Ma has never seen a Republican. So the farmer went and got Ma and gathered some other people around, and while he was doing that, the candidate was looking around for a platform or someplace to stand on so that he could give his political stump speech. And he couldn't find anyone. The only thing he saw was a pile on the farm of that stuff we call fertilizer. Kind of dried out, and he said, well, is that all I got? That's all I'm going to do. I'm going to stand on the podium. And he did. Well, with no other choice, really, the Republican candidate decided to get up on the mound, and he gave his speech to a crowd that had gathered. The farmer had gone out and said, hey, we got this Republican on the farm. Why don't you come hear what he has to say? Well, when the candidate finished his speech, he came down off the pile. The farmer said to him at that time, that's the first time I've ever heard a Republican speech. And the Republican candidate said, well, sir, that's the first time I've ever given a speech from a Democratic platform. It's a great story. It is simply one of the best. And I have just loved that for a long, long time. And it's a great story, and you can see that story. Mr. Reagan is a whole lot better in telling the story than I am, but he does a great, great job. But let's talk for a few minutes this morning, if you're still awake, and I hope you are, about a couple of terms. I want to talk to you, first of all, about this term that is kicked around all the time called the American dream. I want to share with you a story today about a man who I knew for a long, long time, and his first name, we'll call him Bill, okay? Bill was the 13th of 15 children. That's a large, large family. Bill dropped out of school after his sophomore year so he could go to work on the farm and his family farm. When he got older, he went to work off the farm for a man who owned a nearby grocery store. The name of the grocery store took the man's name, and it was McCarthy's Grocery Store, okay? Well, Bill was working at the grocery store once. He met a woman by the name of Mary Claire, and he fell in love with her, and they dated for a short period of time and eventually got married. Now, Bill's dream, his American dream, was really to own his own grocery store, to someday own his own business. That was his dream. But he had a long way to go, a very long way to go. Well, after marrying Mary, 6 children came along into the family, and he had to support them. So Bill would get up every morning at 4:30 in the morning. He delivered bread. That was his job. He was a bread man. First, he would load up his truck and go to 2 nearby colleges and universities that was in his town, and he would, leave off bread to feed the kids at school. He'd go back to the shop, reload his truck, and then begin his daily route. He would do that 6 days a week. When he got home at night after a very long day, after being up by about 3:30 in the morning, he would have dinner with the family. Dinner was always at 6 o'clock, apparently, in this home. And he would then go back to work. He had remodeled his garage and turned it into a butcher shop. And there he would cut meat like pork and beef, deer, bear, during the hunting season. One day, while he was on his paper route, a man that he had delivered bread to for a long, long time for his grocery store asked Bill if he would like to purchase his store. Well, Bill saw his opportunity, and he was able to put some finances together and purchase his store. Now, it needed a lot of work, but that didn't frighten Bill, and he said he took a chance and decided to own his grocery store. Now, in a short span of about 12 years, Bill was able to build his business into a very positive and profitable venture. Not only did he now have the grocery store, but he built a restaurant. He named the restaurant Jackie's after his youngest daughter. His youngest daughter was named Jacqueline, and she was named after Jacqueline Kennedy. Bill was fascinated with the Kennedys. He also built a liquor store and invested in a number of apartments for the nearby college that kids could rent. He also became very active in his local community. He served on a number of local boards, including the school board. He ran for office once, though he lost, but he kept on going. His children all went to parochial school, and the nuns who taught them never went hungry, because every month Bill would call them and say, "What do you need for groceries?" They would give him a list, and he would deliver them a truckload of groceries at no cost whatsoever. That was the kindness of his heart. Whenever an organization in that community needed financial help, they would always turn to Bill for money, and he would call his buddies and hit them up for donations as well. I bet, Dave, you've done this a few times in your career. Bill's life was cut short by a heart attack at the age of 48. Although his life was cut short, Bill still had the chance to live the American dream. It's what he always wanted to do. Bill's grocery store was named Arquette Superette. Bill was my father. Bill got a chance to live the American dream. The slogan at the grocery store, Kathy may be able to relate to this a little bit, "If we don't have it, you don't need it." We carried everything in that grocery store. And I had a chance for a long, long time to work side by my father. And my father is a man I love and I admire. Was he a perfect man? No, none of us are we? But he taught us what the American dream was all about. And everybody in this room has a different idea as to what the American dream is always all about. But Bill lived it. And I think we all have an opportunity in this great country in which we live in today to live that American dream. President Trump, during his last State of the Union address back in January, was criticized when he said to the American people that Americans are dreamers. There's, of course, a lot of talk in this country today about the dreamers, the kids who were brought to this country illegally. But Donald Trump and his supporters have spoken up over the last years for all Americans, all of us really, who are trying to live their American dream. Some have called them the forgotten Americans. How many of you over the years have felt like you're a forgotten American? Hey, what about us? We often hear terms like American exceptionalism, the American dream. How do you define terms like that? You know, people criticize Americans who say that we're exceptional, an exceptional country, and we go around boasting about it. Good for us. It's fine with me if we do that. But the American dream is more than that. And American exceptionalism is much more than that. American exceptionalism is easy if you want to melt it all down. It comes down to the fact that this country was founded on the simple, and it's a very simple principle, that no matter the color of your skin, no matter the country that you came from, no matter the language you speak, every person in this country is given that opportunity to live the American dream. The American dream, as I said, is really, if you think about it, different for everyone. I went around the room today and asked each of you individually what the American dream is to you. You would give us a different answer. The American dream, as I said, is different. But there is a common theme about it. If you are determined, if you work hard enough, if you're smart enough, and I don't mean book-wise, if you just have horse sense. My wife was raised on a farm in southeast Idaho, and she just has horse sense, common sense. She can look at a problem, and I'll say, well, let's go to the manual, or let's call an expert to come in and fix it. And she'll look at me and say, go stand on that pile of fertilizer for a minute. We'll fix it ourselves. She's that independent, and she does things like that. Kathy knows my wife and has met my wife on several occasions. So the American dream, or American exceptionalism, is the great opportunity that we all have, and no other country is like this in the world today. T.E. Lawrence, whose remarkable life, if you don't know about T.E. Lawrence, was portrayed in the movie Lawrence of Arabia. It's a wonderful, wonderful movie put together, I think, produced by David Lean many, many years ago. He once wrote this is rather interesting. He said, "All men dream, but not equally. Those who dream at night, in the dusty recesses of their minds, awake to find it a vanity. But the dreamers of the day are dangerous men, that they may act on their dreams with open eyes to make it possible." It's a wonderful quote. The challenge we all face today, I think in this country, and I think many of you would realize this, is to protect and preserve the idea of the American dream. And it is under attack. We all know that, from forces both inside and outside the country. They want to tear it apart, and they want to tear it down. Columnist Susan Shelley pointed out in her recent column following the President's State of the Union address back in January that President Trump, in his State of the Union, did not offer the country fear, but an America of each individual's own choosing, that personal liberty. It was clearly evident if you watch it, and I just love watching State of the Union address. I know I'm kind of weird. But you see, depending on which party is in power and who the president is, either Republicans will stand and clap, and the Democrats sit there. And it happens when when Barack Obama was president as well. Shelley writes, and I thought this was very interesting, the divisions that we saw that night when Republicans were standing and Democrats were sitting on their tuchuses were sharply different, and it really was a sharply different view of America in many, many ways. Different philosophies and different ideas about what the human condition is in this world today. She added, of course, our lives are determined in some ways by our race, our gender, our ethnicity, our background, our characteristics. We cannot change our destiny. We are essentially victims, unfortunately, in this country today, and the government offer of protection. We'll take care of you. Let us take care of you. And to a lot of people in this country, unfortunately, that is becoming a very attractive invitation. But if we are willing to make our own choices, and this is where we are today, to really make our own choices and steer our own course, then what we need is less government and more freedom. Wouldn't that be a wonderful idea in this country today? Contrast what the president said during the State of the Union address that night with the Democratic response. Remember who it came from? Congressman Joe Kennedy, a couple of years ago. Remember that? Congressman Joe Kennedy. Now, Kennedy's response to what the president said was basically a catalog of hardship and fear. He talked about the parent who lies awake at night, just terrified, and the many who are hungry and anxious. That's the message that he presented to the American people. He said, if the president builds the wall, his generation will tear it down. Well, Joe Kennedy forgot that they have a very high wall surrounding their place in Hyannisport. Apparently, they don't mind the wall being there, right? But there is another view of America, and Donald Trump talked about that, and he continues to talk about that. In his remarks on that State of the Union address, he outlined his views and the views of many about what America really is about. I think the views of what many of you have in this room this morning. Here's what he said. Donald Trump said, "No people on earth are so fearless or daring or determined as Americans. If there is a mountain, guess what? We climb it. If there is a frontier, guess what? We cross it. If there is a challenge, we tame it. If there is an opportunity, we seize it." How long has it been since you've heard a president talk like that about the great American country in which we live today? We didn't hear any talk about fear in that speech so much, but I fear over the years, and I think many of you are aware of this, and you'll hear more speakers talk about this today, that this country has been on a very long and slow march toward secular social democracy. And the march seems to be picking up speed more and more. And that's what's got to be frightening. If you think about it, and I know Scott will talk about this probably, that the United States is the only nation in the annals of mankind to be established on the basis of a political and social philosophy. And what is that philosophy? That America is founded and centered on the natural, God-given rights that we all have. It comes down to that. Yet, within the 232, 33 years now of our founding, America, I fear, has essentially transformed itself into a secular social democracy. Property rights, as many of you know, are really the bedrock of the American political system. Without that foundation, and I'll explain what I mean by property rights in a minute, there is no freedom. The founders held that property rights, and you hear that term quite often, encompass not just physical property, but also one's own life, one's own labor, one's own livelihood, as individuals own their own lives, therefore, that we're allowed to trade in free exchange with others to sustain the lifestyle in which we choose. Our founders further believed that the primary role of government is to guarantee and protect those property rights, those individual rights, and to protect those rights, and further, that these rights, again, are very natural and are God-given. That's what it was. Thus, the Declaration of Independence declares what? That men are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that to secure those rights, governments are instituted. To secure those rights, governments are instituted by men. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, in the Communist Manifesto, they summed it up this way, and it's pretty simple to understand. The theory of communism can be summed up in a very simple sentence: abolition of private property. They contend that one's labor or one's livelihood, and by extension really one's life, is not private property. It is the subordinate to the common good as determined by not the individual, but by the state. The founders, of course, were profoundly influenced, and I think many of you know, by the writings of Aristotle, Cicero, and Locke, when they wrote both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. It is the natural right of property. That is a constitutional right. And that right has enabled the United States of America to be the most prosperous and most successful nation in the history of mankind. And it still is today. Nonetheless, since the 1930s, and you could probably go back even further than that, progressives have been extraordinarily successful in gradually, and it's a gradual process, transforming the country into what the founders feared. And I wonder if it exists today, a nation dominated by an all-powerful central government running roughshod over man's and woman's inalienable rights. Dave asked me to take a few minutes as well and talk to you today about globalism. There is something all you sick and twisted freaks out in the audience today have been talking about for a long time, if you think about it. Dave, over the year, has been able to put together meeting after meeting in which he brings in people who talk about globalism, and you talk about it, and nobody pays attention to it. Oh, you're a bunch of whack jobs, you know what to. There's no secret plan to take over the world. Really? Think about it for a minute. We now have somebody who's not afraid to talk about it. His name is Donald Trump. He's not afraid. He sees it. He's tapped into it. When was the last time you heard a president of the United States stand before the UN General Assembly, as he did just a couple of weeks ago, and talk about the challenge and the threat that globalism poses, not only to the United States, but to really countries around the world? Remember when he said, don't be ashamed to put America first. Don't be ashamed to put France first. Oh, no. Don't be afraid to put Canada first. Each of you have that right. That's what it's all about. Think about, now I have a question. Can anybody tell me what happened in November of 1989? Berlin Wall came. Very good. You get a gold star. Dave, give that guy a donut or something, would you? But think about what the collapse of the Berlin Wall, what happened after the collapse of the Berlin Wall. It marked the end of the Soviet Empire. It marked the end of the Cold War, even though it appears to be coming back. It marked the end of the vestiges of nationalism as a political force. Instead, there was a new era of progress and prosperity fueled by unprecedented trade and relatively global harmony. Countries in Europe, they were no longer at each other's throat. The EU swelled. NAFTA was passed. And I can't believe this, but Americans started watching the World Cup, if you think about it. But something happened several years later. All of a sudden, nationalism, like some big monster in a horror film that didn't realize it, and it should be dead, all of a sudden returned and came back to life. The United Kingdom's stunning, and this is a stunning event, the Brexit vote, told the UN or the EU that we're out of here. We don't want to be a part of the European Union anymore. And they're still struggling with that, trying to make that happen. It's supposed to happen at the end of the month. We'll see if it does take place. And here in the U.S., there was something else taking place. It was called Trumpism, a term you hear quite often. Now, people ask, how did things change so quickly? What happened, okay? Well, Matthew Continetti, he's a writer. You'll see him on Fox News quite often. He writes for the Washington Beacon. And he claims, this is his theory, which is rather interesting, that this rebirth of nationalism in many ways, the scales tipped in its favor in 2014. So what happened in 2014? This is what he said. He said, my thesis is that the child migration on our southern border and President Obama's expression of his executive amnesty to relatives of minors brought here illegally, despite his repeated insistence that he lacked the authority to do so, he did it anyway. And Matthew writes, that reversed the poles of American politics. No longer do we debate about government. The debate we have now is about our nation. Do we have one nation? What are its interests? And who benefits from it? You know, as I mentioned, I thought Continetti's argument was quite right. There are a few other things. But if you cut through the populism, you cut through all the bravado and the machismo that Donald Trump has, you'll find anti-globalism at the heart of many of the messages that Donald Trump shares with us all the time. As a matter of fact, Joshua Mitchell is a professor of political science at Georgetown University. And he points to this, as well as Trump's rejection of identity politics, which is at the heart of his campaign in many ways, this is what he talked about when it came to nationalism, and what you have to pay attention to when you hear Donald Trump speak. He said, if you listen closely enough, you'll hear a direct repudiation of the system of globalization and identity politics that has defined the world in many ways since the Cold War. Here are the 6 specific ideas that Donald Trump either blurts out when he gives his speeches, or is thinly veiled in his rhetoric. He talks about this, and he tells the American people, and listen closely to his speeches. Number 1, borders matter. Number 2, immigration policy matters. Number 3, national interest, not so-called universal interest, matter. Number 4, entrepreneurship matters. Number 5, decentralization matters. And number 6, PC speech, without which identity politics is inconceivable, must be repudiated. If you listen to Trump's speech over the years, you can see themes throughout every one of those, and he's touching on those points all the time. Now, I want you to think about, just for a minute, what the Democrats and their allies in the media, and it's really now the Democrat media, if you think about it, are telling us, and they've been telling us now for several years. Much of this comes from our education system, unfortunately. But what did Barack Obama basically do over the years? He tell us that every problem in the world out there is all America's fault. We're the bad guys, right? It's America's fault. Because we're the world's superpower, and have been that way really since the end of World War II. Our foreign policy has come down to this, basically, if you think about it. We don't want to make anybody mad at us. That's our foreign policy. We don't want to make anybody mad at us. You know, but Donald Trump sees it differently. And I think the people who supported him and voted for him, the 63 million Americans who voted for him, saw it this way. Donald Trump and most Americans believe that we do not owe anybody anything. We don't owe them anybody. We don't owe them to give away all our self-interest because we're the lone superpower in the world. Now, it doesn't mean that we aren't going to pay our bills and we aren't going to support those who we believe in. It doesn't mean that they can structure deals with a disadvantage of us. That's not what this is all about. It doesn't mean that at all. So here we have Donald Trump, interesting cat, who is trying to redefine all of this, in which over the years we've said to the world, we're sorry. We didn't mean it. You know, we want to be nice people. The Trump is defining it. He says, we are the United States of America, and we're not guilty. We don't feel guilty. We are not ashamed. We're the United States of America. And we know that we're the world's largest economy, and we are the economy that propels American policy. We know that that American policy is going to benefit not only the United States of America, because we'll be first, because in the process of all of this, everybody else in the world is going to prosper as well. Because guess what? We're the good guys. We got the white hats. That's what Donald Trump is saying. You know, we aren't stealing anybody's resources. We're not selling people short out there. We're not shortchanging. We're not stealing. We aren't doing any of this. And that's what Donald Trump has been saying. When our economy grows, guess what? Our sphere of influence grows. The rest of the world benefits when that happens. And we no longer are going to apologize for that. Are you tired of America apologizing around the world? Oh, we're sorry. We're really big. We do a lot of things. We're sorry. Donald Trump says, the heck with all that. It's nothing to be ashamed of. And he stands up and fights for it. Now, how much has that belief shaken up the globalist? Boy, it has shaken them up a lot. Both the Republicans and Democrats in Washington and around the world. They want a world order where the United States and the people like you who call themselves Americans to become the provider to the world and not the generator of the world. Trump said, those days are done. I'm done with that. We aren't doing that anymore. It's been the world order since World War II. But Trump is upsetting the apple cart. I mean, think about what he has done. And they've decided to push back. They're trying to do whatever they can to push back because they see Trump as obliterating and turning the world upside down. Don't you just love it? I remember when he was elected, somebody asked me about Trump, what do you want him to be? I said, have any of you seen, what is the movie? It's the movie about Frederick the Bull or whatever, you know, and the bull is being chased, big bull, but a friendly bull. And the bull finds himself stuck in this little shop, and guess what it is? Ferdinand, thank you. He's stuck in this little shop, and guess what the shop is? It's a china shop. And he's got to get out of the china shop without breaking any of the china. That's Donald Trump. But Donald Trump said, I don't care if I break some china. We're going to break some china. So when someone asked me after Trump was elected, what do you want the president to do? I said, I want the president to be the bull in the china shop. It is about time we do these things. Now, some people have said, and I think I was just given the 5-minute warning, so I better shut up in a minute or Dave come up and beat me up. said that the 2016 presidential election was the most important election of our lifetime. And I think it was. But I think the 2020, the 2024, the 2028, you go on and on, every election in this country, with what we're now seeing, is the most important election of our lifetime. Consider for just a minute, if you would, what the Democrats have talked about over the last few months as they've campaigned for the White House. And we're going to hear more and more of this in the coming months. What they are telling the American people, what they would do if power was turned over to them. Listen to this list, because it's frightening. Consider these proposals: open borders, free health care, not only for all Americans, but for those who are in the country illegally. Student debt forgiven, free college, abortion right up to the time the child is born, and then killing the child after the child is born if the mother and doctor say to each other, it would be better if we killed the child now. That's what they're talking about. Not having any more children. It's a new trend in the UK, so they don't hurt the environment anymore, the climate. The Green New Deal, or the New Green Deal. I've never figured out how you're supposed to say that, and all its ramifications. Boys using girls' bathrooms, and girls using boys' bathrooms. Boys who think that they're girls competing in girl sports. They think they're girls, so I'm going to go compete in a girls' sport. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said just the other day, we should eliminate all prisons in this country. No more government ownership of private property so that the government can provide free and affordable housing for everybody. Universal basic income. Confiscation of your guns. And as we heard just Thursday night, a declaration of war on the tax-exempt status of churches if they believe in a Bible that says marriage is between man and a woman. That's what they're talking about. That's what they're out there. Now, are you frightened yet? Hopefully not. Hopefully you're willing to stand up to it. And I think the great thing, the interesting thing about what Donald Trump has done over the years is basically he has exposed the Democrats for all of this. He has exposed the media. We now understand what the media is all about in this country. We've always thought about it, but Donald Trump has called them out. And they're saying, no, we're journalists. No, we're journalists. We're fair and balanced. Really? I mean, you can see it in the stories and the word. Pay attention to the words they use in their stories. It is fascinating to see what there is. There is definitely an ongoing battle for freedom in this country. You know, they want more and more power over all of us, and we have to stand up to it. And they're using journalism now. They're open about it now. They're using journalism to defend their story because we all believe what's in the newspaper, don't we? We all believe what's on the TV news at night, don't we? See how they're using journalism now to end their story. So like I said, if Donald Trump has done one thing over the past 4 years since he came down the golden escalator back in June of 2015, is that he has flushed the Democrats and has flushed the Democratic-controlled news media for what they are. The anger directed at this man is unbelievable. And really, they're directing that anger for all of you who voted for Donald Trump. They're saying, we don't want you. We don't like you. We think you're crazy. Well, let me tell you what. How do you fight it? It's pretty easy. We have this wonderful thing in this country called the vote. Be engaged, get out and vote. We know all of this now. You know, we are probably the best informed generation that has ever existed on this earth. The technology is available. Learn about it. Understand what's going on, not only nationally, but in this great state of ours, in the counties in which you live, in the communities in which you live. Learn about what's going on and then get engaged. If my message today would be do something, it is that. You all are engaged. Talk to people. Don't be afraid to talk to people. You know, a lot of people say, well, I'm afraid they'll say something to me because I like Donald Trump. Who cares? Get out there and tell them. Pick up your whistle and blow it. And say, guess what, folks? We have a message for you. I end my show every day this way. For those of you who have listened, if you don't, shame on you. Actually, I have about 28 listeners. I figure I got 28 listeners today. We're doing okay. But I end the show every day, if you listen, with this simple message. Head up, shoulders back. May God bless you, your family, and this great country of ours each and every day. Again, thank you for letting me spend a few minutes. The man with the numbers is telling me to shut up. Dave, you should just put on those signs, shut up. He said thank you. Shut up, okay? The one thing, and in conclusion, the one thing people don't understand about people like Donald Trump is from New York. He's a New Yorker. He's in the city. His hands are going all over the place, right? Donald Trump will tell you what he thinks of you to your face. In Washington, they'll tell you when your back is turned. And that's what America is having such a tough time adjusting to. Again, thank you very, very much for your time. I hope I didn't put you all to sleep this morning. It's been wonderful. Thank you very, very much.
If you don't listen to Mr. Arquette, you can repent. You ought to do it. We've been friends for a long time, and what he said, it's one thing to be here and learn, right? But we don't want to just, ain't it awful? Ain't it awful? The job, like your mom and dad did for years and years and years, is to share that. The job is to create an informed electorate. So when that election time does come, we go in there and we cast a vote that's it's wise, intellectually honest, right?
You're right.
That's the job for all of us, to create, maybe 10 people to share. Like I said, if they don't like it, go to the next one, right? We're surrounded by people we work with. So that's our job, is to create an informed electorate so things happen in the polls that are appropriate. We very much appreciate you being here, my friend. It's great to have good people like this with us and associate with us. Appreciate your thoughts very much, sir.
Thank you. I need to say one thing. I didn't mention that I went to school down in Texas. Okay, Texas is a great state. I love Texas. Austin's a little weird. Austin's a lot of weird. Austin has been characterized as the blueberry and the tomato soup of Texas. And that's what it really is if you've ever been to Austin. But I'm a big Texas football fan. And in roughly about 15 minutes ago, Texas started playing the University of Oklahoma. We hate Oklahoma. OU weekend is a big weekend, so I got to leave and go watch the game. So, Dave, thank you for scheduling me early so I can get back, because I've got to put my Texas stuff. There we go. Hook 'em, right? Hook 'em. You're right. So thank you. David, thank you.